and faculty here at the university for inviting me. This is my first time to Nebraska, well, Lincoln, Nebraska. I did drive through Nebraska once. My first cross-country trip from Detroit to the Bay Area, and I remember 3 o'clock in the morning stopping to use the restroom, and some guy at the convenience store pulling out a shotgun and threatening us. So that was my previous memory of Nebraska, and so thank you so much for, yes, I did because of you, and so far this has been great. As Gary said, we worked together at WashingtonPost.com. I think by the time he got to the Washington Post online service, it was .com. But when I started way back in 1995, and it's kind of hard to think of the fact that it's been 20 years of being in new media, it was called Digital Inc. And Jim Brady and I were, I think, employee number 4 and 5. He preceded me by a day. And we're in this brand new creation in a city where they take their media very seriously. The Washington Post was beloved, 80% penetration, and here we were starting up this new media outfit and just really trying to figure it out. My second day on the job, the Oklahoma City bombing happened, and I think that shaped my perception of what you do and how you react in new media from then moving forward to this day. Because for the first 2 days I was there and I was being trained by folks who had been there a few days earlier, we were basically putting up stories from the Washington Post and enhancing them. So I was the Metro editor, so I'd find 1 or 2, interesting stories from the paper that they allowed us to put online. And we'd find extra enhancements, photographs, maybe a map or something like that and put it up. All of a sudden we walk in and what was about 10 o'clock in the morning in Washington, we had this chaos unfolding in Oklahoma City where some people had blown up this building. Well, at the time, we didn't know if it was a natural disaster. We didn't know if it was domestic terrorism, international terrorism, or what. But on that day, I think what we learned was how to do breaking news. And because we had to sort of figure it out as it was unfolding and happening. Now, it sounds kind of strange, especially for you younger people, that we didn't do breaking news back then, but we didn't. And most of the publications that were online back in April of 1995 really didn't do breaking news. You got your online publication either through CompuServe, Prodigy, or the outfit that we were on was called AT&T Interchange. And there were only 3 publications on it, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, and I think some Star Tribune. Yeah, so just a few. But ours were our system was so high end that you had to have a 386 in order to download our content. The other ones you could get it with the 286. And of course, none of you students know what I'm talking about because this was the high end of computing. My first computer I got at, I think it was a Best Buy for like $100, and I put it in my shopping cart. It was just so basic back then. But on that day, when the bombing happened, we had to figure out how to do breaking news. We had to figure out how to relate to the newspaper. I can remember going back, because I had just come over a couple of days before as a liaison, asking if we could get a story to put on Digital Inc., which was the name of our publication. And they were like, oh, we can't give you a story. Suppose we get it wrong. Suppose we say it's this, and it turns out to be that. We can't do this. And so my reaction was, okay, well, if you don't want to give us a story, then I'll have one of my young interns write the story, and that'll be the Washington Post byline, on this thing that people were turning to us to figure out what was going on. So they're like, oh, well, that might not be good to have a kid, Bill Frischling, straight out of Michigan to write this story. And so they huddled with the lawyers, and they eventually gave us a story around, I think, 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock that day, and then they continued to allow us to update it. So from there, I think we learned that you had to be entrepreneurial and innovative in your thinking if you were going to master this online thing. And we didn't quite know what it was going to be. A few months later, some of you might remember that the verdict in the O.J. Simpson trial came in. Were you there then? Yeah. Oh my God, that was like the best day. So we're waiting. You know, we had CNN on, and we knew how slow our site was in terms of updating. We hadn't quite gone to the web. So we had a big monitor that we put down on the street of the Washington Post, and we had extension cords because we were in this little place back behind the cafeteria, that we strung the extension cords over the balcony, and we had a whole bunch of them. We plugged it in, and it was miraculous. So as soon as the verdict came in, we had 2 home pages because we knew how slow our site was, guilty and not guilty. And as soon as they said not guilty, we hit the publish button, and it was just like we imagined. A full 3 minutes later, the homepage came up on this monitor that was downstairs. And so as people were walking by K Street, the Washington Post building, we had a keyboard set up, and we had a little discussion area. And we invited people to walk up and put in their thoughts about this verdict. And people were just so amazed by it. But that was us innovating. How do we get breaking news out to people? We didn't have Twitter back then. And, you know, Morse code would have just been a little bit too hard. So we just put this monitor down there and just let people experience things in real time, as it was, well, kind of real time because we were really slow, as it happened. Now, about a few months after that, we were all called into a meeting at the Post, and we were told by the higher ups that they had it on good authority that there's this new technology that allowed us to use graphics and information in a better, you know, more seamless way, and that the New York Times and USA Today and the LA Times were going to move to this thing called the World Wide Web. And we had to be prepared too. And so we had to learn HTML and all of that, and then figure out what should we be doing on the World Wide Web that we couldn't do on digital ink, and how we should position this thing moving forward. So it was everything that we had to figure out from the business side of it. One of the things that the Post.com advertising people decided sort of in publisher early on is that Post.com would not be an add-on to the newspaper, that if you bought advertising in the newspaper, we wouldn't just throw in a banner ad on WashingtonPost.com. So we were, again, inventing, being innovative, you know, every day, trying to figure this thing out. And again, those lessons stuck with me. And I want to talk about how I've carried those lessons, you know, throughout my career, but also here or at the Cronkite School, and then the New Media Innovation Lab. But first I have to give you one more story. So in October of 1996, the Million Man March happened in Washington, D.C. And this was huge, 1 million men coming to Washington, D.C. We had our interns deployed. We were going to, you know, cover this thing. It was truly an event that was made for the web to be able to update. And Dan Pacheco had this wireless router, and he whipped it out, and it's like, this thing will allow us to, say what? The Ricochet would allow us to take laptops out on the National Mall and be able to report back. And of course, we gathered around, just like we're doing with the VR. Ooh, and he connected it to the back of he had a couple of them to the back of a, yeah, Velcro, to these laptops, and we sent interns out. Of course, all the African-American interns had taken the day off, so they could participate. So we had all these young white kids with the laptops in their hands and walking down the mall, you know, like this, and allow people to go on and type in their thoughts about what was happening with this amazing Million Man March that transformed Washington, D.C. for a day. You know, where people were kind to black folks, and then it went back the next day. But it was, you know, Dan was always one of those cutting edge people, and I continue to learn from him, you know, to this day. But I think with Brady and Pacheco and Bill Frischling and all of us who started out back then, we took away that sense of wonder with the online world. And I know 20 years later, we're still just kind of scratching the surface. And I try to give that to our students, you know, every day, in terms of if it's not there already, create it. Be an inventor, be an innovator. And I think it's so important. You know, journalism schools have been around for a long time, and journalism. You know, and over the years, you know, of course, it's changed. It's become more diverse. More women, you know, became journalists and did some amazing things. More African Americans and other people of color, you know, came into the nation's newsrooms, and it diversified in just any number of ways. But even now, with the advent of the internet, you know, 20 years ago, and I think even today, you still have a lot of reluctance in both journalism schools and in our nation's newsrooms. I mean, this is a picture from Medill, you know, back in the early days of multimedia. This, of course, is the new building, I think, at USC, Edinburgh. And this is from News 21, which is a national investigative reporting project that we do every summer at the Cronkite School, where we bring in students from all over the country and other journalism schools to do an investigative deep dive into a particular subject and try to do it in innovative ways. So journalism schools and journalism, I think they've changed, although somewhat reluctantly. But as we look at where we are now in the state of journalism, both here in the heartland, but also across the United States and the world, what we have to think about is understand that, you know, multimedia and, you know, some of the stuff that we're starting to do with telephones, with mobile phones, all that technology is just the beginning of where we need to be. And we should always be thinking about how we can take technology that is perhaps being developed for other industries, gaming or entertainment, and think about what we can do for storytelling and for news. I think both the industry and journalism schools in many ways are already falling behind, because we'll do a little sprint, you know, kind of catch up, and then we fall back. And in listening to Alan's presentation yesterday from his organization, you know, everything that they're learning about analytics and tracking people and behavior and all of that, he told me that the one industry that's like really not participating in this and not taking it seriously, of course, is the news industry. When he's working with NBC, all of their other divisions are jumping on this and understanding audience behavior and audience buying patterns and all of this. But of course, the newsroom is kind of hands off. And what I would say to you is that we've got to get out of that thinking, and we have to figure out how to be better at this. Amy Webb, who I think a lot of you guys know as this, you know, futurist and, you know, kind of tech trend spotting person, tells his story. She's recently written a book, an ebook, after being at Neiman, about how we can improve journalism education. And she tells his story about how back in 2000, when she had started Columbia grad school after traveling and living in Asia for a while, and she's sitting in this one class, and they were talking about the ethics of digital photography. And so she asked this one question about, shouldn't we anticipate audience and citizen participation? That what she saw in Korea and a lot of those other places is that people were taking pictures and sharing them, and people were taking them and putting them on their news sites. And what was interesting was the reaction from her professor. As she said, I was immediately and somewhat embarrassingly dismissed. Why on earth would anyone print a low quality photo in the newspaper or show it on TV? That won't happen, my professor snapped back, returning the conversation to the ethics of digital cameras. And you might think, well, that was back then. That was in 2000. Surely we've learned from that. And in my travels around the country and talking to faculty and students from other universities, as well as, you know, a few at my own university, they haven't changed all that much. There's still a reluctance, I think, to like truly embrace technology for what it can do for the journalism field and for communicating with our people, with our constituents, and that two-way we media type of communication. So whether it's, you know, news games or virtual reality, or, you know, the Internet of Things or augmented reality, coding, I mean, there's still this question like, should we really be teaching that? Should we really be focusing in on that? Shouldn't we be thinking about traditional storytelling and ethics and getting the story right? And my answer is, of course. We should be doing all of that. But we also have to train people for the world that we live in now, not the world that we used to have. And if you're coming out of journalism school and you're not thinking as an innovator and you're not thinking in many ways entrepreneurially, I think you're going to be at a disadvantage in getting those jobs. You're truly going to be at a disadvantage because the industry is searching for answers. The industry is searching for connections, and they need people who can, yes, write stories, produce news, be on air, look good, do multimedia, but who also can think ahead. If they're hiring you, it's because you're under 25 and they just assume that you're going to think about things in a completely different way, and you need to have those skills. Thank you. So one of the things that Amy listed in her talk, she had 6 hidden challenges in journalism education. And there are a bunch of them here, 6 of them. She talked about no culture of academic leadership within journalism departments and schools. I'm not going to touch that one. The current system prevents curriculum development from keeping pace with the changing realities of modern newsrooms. And I absolutely agree with that one. But the one that I wanted to, she talks about journalism schools not fundraising on par with their peers within the university. Yeah, the sports department and the business department and the computer science, they're getting a lot of money. And we need to make our case, I think, that we have a huge impact on society and that we are deserving of support. I think one of the reasons the Cronkite School has done so well is President Michael Crow is a staunch supporter of journalism. He gets it. He understands how important it is that we are thriving and that we have a robust and meaningful newspaper and news culture, and he puts money where his mouth is, and he's hired people, including our dean, who's able to go out there and fundraise. But what I really want to focus in on is this last thing that she wrote, or this last bullet point. And she said, journalism schools have not cultivated a symbiotic relationship with the industry. So I want to sort of focus much of what my talk on what we're doing at the Cronkite School and the attitude that we have toward working with industry, and how if you're not doing it at your shop, at your school, that you can do it as well. So in many ways, and you've heard Eric Newton, who's now at our school as an news innovative chief, talk about the teaching hospital method of journalism education. And the whole point of that is that we need to step out of just theory and teaching people to go into an industry that changed 20 years ago. So we have a lot of hands-on journalism projects and programs and professional development. So whether you want to go into broadcast, we have a daily news show that we put on. Whether you want to be a photographer, whether you want to do multimedia, or whether you want to do investigative. We have about 8 different professional development projects, programs where you spend anywhere from 2 to 4 days a week towards the end of your undergrad experience there, or as a grad student, where you're getting that hands-on experience, where you're going to the border to report on immigration issues, where we have a bureau in Washington, D.C., where you're covering the delegation to Congress for newspapers all across Arizona, working with PBS, Channel 8, working on our own newscast, as I said, doing that daily production for multimedia. So we've had those for a number of years. We also have international reporting opportunities where students go over to Europe or go to China. We have a business course or program where students who are interested in being a business reporter can get that hands-on experience. So when you're thrown into that first job as a business reporter, you understand credit swaps and covering all these complicated, super complicated issues that come up in the world of covering finances and technology. So I'm part of that teaching hospital method or type of journalism education, but I've always kind of considered myself the MASH unit. So those young people who don't know what MASH is, you should go back and watch it. But MASH was a show that was centered, it came out in the 70s, but it was actually about the Korean War. And the MASH unit was this little outpost where the doctors and nurses were on the front lines, and as the guys were being brought in from war, they had to improvise a lot. They had to figure out how to, do a stint, or they had to figure out how to do all kinds of new methods to save these young men's lives that they had maybe read about in a publication that was 5 months old because it just got to them in Korea, or they were making it up as they went along. And I often feel like this, just eyes wide open, hands stuck down in code or hands stuck down in a project, trying to figure it out. We just have the confidence, and again, going back to the WashingtonPost.com early days, to know that we might fail, but it's okay because you have to try. We're not saving lives, and we're not working on wounded soldiers, but we know that this industry is struggling, and we have to figure out things. So a lot of what we do is we will work with clients. Remember what Amy said about that symbiotic relationship with the industry. So with the New Media Innovation and Entrepreneurship Lab, we are a small creative shop, interactive agency in many ways for clients, whether it's the Arizona Republic, Gannett, Pac-12, or some of these other large outfits that will hire our students to figure out something for them. In some cases, we might do a national study. I remember, Gannett hiring us to do a study on if young people would actually use smartphones, and the answer was yes. But they paid us a lot of money to work on that one. But they were more interested in how young people were going to use those smartphones. Were they going to use it to text their friends and get on Facebook, or were they going to use it to get traditional news? Like if you were planning to go out on Friday night, would you get the city paper or a local newspaper to see what you were going to do that evening, or were you going to use your smartphone to do it? So we did studies, we did applications for them, and I'm going to go through some of those. But one of the bigger things that emerged over the last few years is doing mobile for these outfits. So this is an example of a mobile app that we did for the state of Arizona, and it kind of stemmed from them getting tired of rescuing people who go up to hike, and then it gets dark and the street lights don't come on the mountain, and then they have to go and rescue them via helicopter, and it's like really expensive and dangerous. So they wanted us to create an app that would, one, showcase all the beautiful hiking trails in the state of Arizona, but also give trail conditions, tell you exactly when the sun was coming up and going down, and also to track you as you go along the trails, even when you don't have cell phone connectivity. So in keeping with our entrepreneurial mindset, in every project, we divide the students into teams. So we might have 3 or 4 people working on this mobile application. One of those students is designated the project manager. And usually what I do is I get the quiet, mousy girl who just try not to speak up, and make her the project manager so she can learn how to take a project from fruition, from thought or ideation to fruition. They're the ones who have to interface with the executives, whether it's at Gannett, the vice president of interactivity, or a vice president of technology at Pac-12, or someone at the state level on in a high position. I'm not holding those meetings. I'm not calling. I'm not interfacing with those people. I let my students do it. Of course, I'm in the meeting just in case there are any burnouts or flip outs, but they amazingly will rise to the occasion and very professionally shepherd some of these projects through. So this is one that we created a couple of years ago, and it's only done in iOS. It was very difficult to do because we had a ton of data. We had a lot of shape files and maps that we had to wrangle and figure out how to get those in the app, have the GPS work, how to filter out local trails and federal trails like the Grand Canyon, and just have the state trails. And I vowed never to work with a government agency ever again after that. I'm pretty much stuck with it. We've done city guide apps, for the city of Phoenix, for the downtown campus of ASU. And again, we do human-centered design work. We go out with just pencil drawings of what we think the app might want to look like. We sit down and talk to people ahead of time to see what their needs are. We look at extreme personalities. So in the case of Urban Devil app, We talked to people who were disabled, people who had who work full time, students who had just moved to downtown Phoenix from some other place, and we really got a feel for what was lacking and what was preventing them from really engaging in the downtown campus as opposed to out on Tempe. Same thing for the Smart Phoenix app. There are a lot of people in Phoenix who work downtown, just won't do anything else. As soon as 5 o'clock, they get in their cars, they go out to the suburbs. Or people who might come in for a ball game, for a Diamondbacks game or a Suns game, but not do anything else. So we had to understand what the issues were and what we needed to build into that app to make it successful. And of course, both of these apps are just wildly successful. When we are hired by companies, they pay us. This is how I fund all my other little sandbox projects that I'll talk about later. But we're charging anywhere from $16,000 to $25,000. Now, that's good money for a program. I don't have an endowment like Dan, and I'm very jealous about that. But by bringing this money in, it allows me to get the latest in iPads and iPhones and Apple Watches and all kinds of things like that. But one of the problems that came up in doing all of these apps, this was another one I did for a small town, and again, I vowed never to work for a small town again. And it was another little, for the communications division of this small town. But we did a mobile scoring app for Pac-12 that wanted a way for student workers to score games, not football, not basketball, not soccer, but any of the other games where that information, once you hit submit, per quarter or per half or whatever it was, it would go directly back to Pac-12 in San Francisco, and it would be chyron onto your television screen during live games. So we were hired to do this. But one of the things that I kind of discovered is that so many businesses, both within Phoenix and Arizona and other major media companies, kind of saw us as a way to build mobile apps for cheap, $16,000, $20,000. So we got a lot of requests to do mobile applications, and it just got tedious. So I stopped doing it. Except for this last one. So this last one I did on my own. I mean, it was an idea that we had been waiting for years for the Valley Metro, who created the light rail system in Phoenix, to have real-time data on when your trains are coming. And Boston and all these other cities had that for years. And I was just like, can you please give me this data? So they released it at the end of 2014. And so what I figured that this would be an opportunity for our students to not only build a mobile application or a smartphone application that would be helpful to people in Phoenix, but also to work on the Apple Watch and to teach them about using data and also designing for the small screen. So we knew that the Apple Watch was coming out sometime in the spring. So we worked on this starting in about end of January. And our Apple Watch app and our smartphone app launched on the day that the Apple Watch dropped. So we were the first Apple Watch app in Arizona to be live in the store. And then we later went on to do an Android version of this, and we have a version of the app for the Samsung Galaxy Watch. So this was a lot of fun, and it's probably one of the last just strictly mobile applications that I'll do for a while, unless some new technology comes out that we can learn from. And then we try to push that learning down into the curriculum as I work with other classrooms. We have a business and future journalism class, we have an entrepreneurship class, we have some other classes. And so it's those students, as I talk to them and encourage them to think of applications that they can build to be more entrepreneurial, I'm passing along a lot of the learnings that we got out of the lab to those students. So I'm able to broaden my reach from the 9 or 10 students who might be in my class per semester to a larger group. Just this week, being here at this conference, I've already done 2 conference calls with separate groups of students who are working on their own business ideas and mentoring them just by phone or by text messaging. And I'm really happy to see that this entrepreneurial sort of excitement has extended beyond my lab. Another thing that we do, and we started about a year ago, is we have an alumni grant, an innovation alumni grant, so that students who graduated, doesn't matter how long ago, who are working in news outfits can apply for $15,000 or up to $15,000 to do something entrepreneurial in their shop. And so students who've never been in my lab, it was really gratifying to see them coming up with ideas, coming up with ways of being innovative, writing for that money. And of course, I sit on the panel and being able to hand out some of this money to help these students to be entrepreneurial. And again, most of them have never been in my lab, but they heard me. They knew what was going on in the school. And even if they were just focused on broadcast or focused on being a print or magazine or documentary reporter, they knew that being an entrepreneur is something that would help them as they moved along in their career. Another thing that we do, or we've been trying to do a lot more of, are applications. And this is something we did for the Arizona Republic, which AZ Central is their website. There are a lot of wildfires in Arizona, as I'm sure you guys have them here in the rest of the Southwest. And they wanted a wildfire tracker that would let you know during active wildfire season, you know, what's burning, how many acres have burned, the cause of it. You can go back and get data going back about 10 or 15 years on wildfires, especially some of the bigger ones like the Wallow Fire or the fire that killed the 19 firefighters a couple of summers ago. And we, you know, again, wrangling data, working with the executives over at the Republic. And the students who worked on this have all gone on to either work at the Republic or doing similar things at news outfits where they were hired. So the bottom line is, you know, we do these projects, and whether it's a City Guide app or something like this for Pac-12 or for the Arizona Republic, those students get that experience. And I have 100% employment coming out of my lab. Even back in 2007, 2008, where, you know, there are not a whole lot of jobs in journalism, my students were going on to get jobs at NPR and at the Arizona Republic and LAR in Amsterdam, working on all kinds of things because they had the skills, they knew how to project manage, they knew how to be innovative, and they can also write. Some of these reporters, some of these young people got jobs where they were reporters half of the time and did innovation half of the time. Remember, one young lady got a job in La Cruces, New Mexico, where she was hired as the education reporter 50% of the time, and the rest of the time she was the one who was hired to train the rest of the staff on multimedia and social media. Another student did the same thing down at the British Virgin Islands. You know, I'm really envious of her. She never came back. I thought she'd be down there for like 2 years. She's still down there, Crystal. And so she's a Cops and Courts reporter half of the time, and half of the time she did their digital strategy. So even small newspapers found a way to bring these students in because they knew they could get kind of a 2-for-1 out of them in terms of their skill set. We also do tools whenever we can. This is a cartogram builder that we did a couple of years ago, just basically where you could upload a data set and watch the United States, you know, grow and change depending on the data. I think this shows, you know, gun ownership in the United States. So Kentucky, note to self, avoid. So we do a lot of these tools just playing around. So sometimes when I have a semester where the clients who are coming to us, they want to do an app, they want to do a City Guide app, and I'm like, nah, I don't want to do any of that stuff. Then what I try to do then is what I call sandbox projects. You know, let's figure out something. And a couple years ago, I got really interested in news games, and I've been interested in a while, but we decided to start working on news games. We held a number of news game jams, you know, workshops, bringing in students, bringing in professionals, and trying to understand their attitudes towards news games and what was preventing them from trying news games. And we know that some journalists like news games, like this New York Times budget game, really gets journalists very excited, but it's rather dense, and I think most young people wouldn't be caught dead playing it unless it was an assignment. And this is what's really exciting to a lot of journalists. And then, of course, you have news interactives like this thing that just got people going and had so many page views. I mean, it was great. Where it was in the New York Times, where you would answer a few questions and it tell you what type of accent you had, and that was really fun. But when it comes to news games like Sweatshop, which is a game to teach you about what it's like to work in a sweatshop in Asia or one of those places, or and that game, by the way, was banned from the Apple Store. Wonder why. or placespent.org. Placespent.org is something that was created not even by journalists, but it was a game to kind of show you what it's like to try to live off of $1,000 a month in Raleigh, North Carolina, and it's been around for a few years. Or this game called Trauma, where you're trying to piece together what happened to a woman. Now, these are really exciting games that are interesting and unfortunately not being done by journalists. And journalists tend to be a little bit reluctant. So we set out to try to understand what's stopping newsrooms from doing news games. And this summer, after getting some funding from Knight, we did a survey. Not too many people took it, but we asked people from the Online News Association, from News Guys, News Food, from AEJMC, from diverse social media, and from all kinds of other groups, about news games. And the good news is that most of them said that either it would help journalism to use news games in storytelling, or they were neutral. But I know for a fact, in talking to people one-on-one, that there's a lot of hostility among journalists and professors around news games because they feel that they're going to trivialize the news. Even though when you play any of these serious, impactful games, you understand a lot. I mean, have you ever played September 12th? Have you heard of September 12th? It's a great little game, but basically it tells you can't win this game. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to shoot terrorists who are running through a neighborhood, and you try to, line it up and shoot them. And every time you try to shoot the terrorists, you miss, and you hit a building, you hit civilians, you do all kinds of things. So after about the third round, you realize, you can't win this game. You know why? Because when you're over, it's not editorial, but when you're over in places and you're bombing from afar, you can create more enemies than you can solve the issue. So it's just a wonderful, small little game. And ProPublica and other outfits have done news games to, great effect, but there's still a whole lot of hostility. We asked people if they've ever made a news game, a playable story, a playable interactive, or a data interactive, and most of these people had not. What are some of the potential pitfalls of using games for storytelling? And again, that they're resource intensive, that they're expensive to make. They have all this pressure to make a fun game without understanding that with impact games, the fun part of it is that people are learning something. I mean, there are 8 styles of types of fun, and if you read the books, they'll talk about there's the silly fun, like when your 3-year-old is tossing something. There's the surprise fun, but there's also the fun of learning something new, and that's what news games can help you with. But you can see that a number of them felt that games would trivialize the news. They also felt that they needed to know how to write for games, they needed to know the elements of game design, and they would need to have programming skills. And I mention all of this because in pushing our clients, the school, other newsrooms to try news games, we decided to create one. So for News 21, about 2 years ago, we created a game called Can You Get What You Need from the VA? And this was right before everything blew up in Phoenix and around the country with the Veterans Administration. And the whole idea was to try to answer the question of why is it that a lot of veterans come back from war and they run into problems, that they are, wind up homeless or other issues. And so we created this game, and we gave you 180 days sped up in seconds to kind of answer all of these type of questions and get through the maze that's out there that a lot of veterans have to go through. And you at the end of the game, hopefully that you understand what it takes and what happens. You do things like your buddy says, you can sleep on my sofa until you can get your benefits and get an apartment. And of course, 9 months later, you're still sleeping on the sofa until his girlfriend is like, he's got to go. And then you wind up at the shelter. Or you charge your tuition because you want to go back to school on a charge card, thinking that your GI Bill will surely come through by the end of the semester and you can pay it off. And of course it never does. And then you've got the creditors hounding you and you've got all kinds of other things. So we created this game, and it cost us in-kind, student labor, my time, my full-time programmers' labor, plus hiring an animator, about $70,000 to do. We got some money from American Public Media because we integrated the Public Insight Network into this. So it was another way of pulling people into to Public Insight Network, which is APM's way of reaching and doing audience engagement. So out of that, it got fair page views. I can understand why a lot of journalists would be reluctant to spend that type of money on a game that may or may not go viral, get a lot of page views. So what we did as a result of that is that we applied for funding from the Knight Prototype Fund to create the Playable Stories engine. And the Playable Stories engine is something that we just demoed back to Knight last Friday. So it's an alpha release right now. And it's going to allow journalists, bloggers, students, whoever, to create news games without having to know a lot of code and without having to know a lot about game mechanics. Now, this is only for narrative-based games, although each game can look completely different from others in the same way that a WordPress template that you create would look different from one that another person would create. You can change your background colors, you can change your meters, you can you write your story, any type of narrative type game. And put your vignettes in. You can have your pop-ups where you give people information on, the choices that they're making. It's optimized for mobile. You can put your probabilities in there, and you can build this game and do it for, pennies. So we did a second version of the Veterans game just for demo over at Knight, and of course we did this really in a couple of days, and it didn't cost us much. So my point is that when we're doing our sandbox projects, we're not only creating things like, hey, let's make a game, but we're thinking about what type of tools can we create that can either be open source and given to the news industry, or that we can spin off into a business for some of our students who really, take to it. And it's like, I love this, I want to do it all the time. Then, I help spin them off. Another thing that a couple years ago that I got interested in when I saw Project Ajax, has anyone seen that or looked at that? Love Project Ajax. It's an interactive graphic novel about the overthrow of the government of Iran back in the 1950s, where the Shah of Iran was put in place, this dictator, right? It's the most fascinating document or interactive that you can read. It's just well done, hand drawn, all of this. When I show it to young people, they get into it. And you're talking about just like a subject matter that you would think wouldn't be appealing to the average 18-year-old. And they kind of scroll through the whole thing. So I got really interested in graphic novels. And this is an example of one that was done by Daryl Holliday and Ian Rodriguez for the Chicago Reader. And it tells the story of this woman, Natasha Stingley, who lost her daughter, Marissa, back in June of 2013. And it was serialized as a graphic novel and was well received. This is another one that the Center for Investigative Reporting had done a series of reports on the numbers of teenagers who go to Rikers Island incarcerated, and so many of them wind up in solitary confinement, for days, for doing things like talking back to the guards. And so they did this investigative reporting, and then they had someone create it as a graphic novel. So I was really interested in trying one on our own. And a year ago, the Cronkite School and the Arizona Association of Broadcasters decided that they wanted to do a documentary on the growth of heroin use in Arizona. It's an epidemic there, as I'm sure it is out here and in a lot of other Western states. And so we worked on a 30-minute documentary that was shown on every station, same time, same day, all across the state of Arizona, on every radio station that was, sort of news oriented, had huge ratings. So what we did in the lab to support that is we came up with a graphic novel on the history of heroin. So we decided to tell the history of heroin going back to 3400 BC. That's a lot of history. So we decided, though, to do it as a graphic novel. And so I just wanted to play this little trailer to give you a sense of how we did it.
Introducing highly potent, the story of heroin, and interactive graphic novel. Discover the remote facts, like how a simple poppy evolved into the heroin of today. Learn how heroin spread to empires around the world, and the conflicts it caused over power. Our intuitive app contains both digital and hand-created visuals to enhance storytelling, along with actual advertisements and news posts from throughout history. Available for download January 2015.
So we created this as a mobile application. It's available right now just through iOS. We also did a Spanish language version of it. And we hand drew over 200 illustrations. We animated those in Adobe Edge, and then we created the mobile app. And we had students who could do this out of the journalism school. We had one student who was an illustrator. We brought in another student from the Herberger School of Art. And then the journalism students figured out the rest of it, had to do all the research, had to project manage it, storyboard it, the whole 9 yard, and then create this app. And it's, you can download it from iOS and take a look at it. It's called Highly Potent. But again, out of that process, a lot of students, especially those who are interested in comics and, trying to find their way in journalism, all of a sudden saw comic journalism as another avenue for them. And there are outfits like the Illustrated Press out of Chicago and other places where people are really getting into this. Dan Archer at Missouri and other folks who are like really pressing the idea of storytelling using different tools. And so this opens up a whole nother arena for them to be journalists, but using a different way of storytelling. So every time I do this, one of these projects and try to think of something new, it's with the idea that our students can gain skills that they wouldn't ordinarily get in a typical journalism school. So they're getting all the basics, the ethics, the writing, the researching, how to be a broadcaster, but they're also learning some of these things and learning how to be an entrepreneur. I've talked a little bit about entrepreneurship, and there are cases where we have students who come to me and I want to start my own business. If I think the idea has legs, we incubate those in the New Media Innovation and Entrepreneurship Lab. One outfit that grew up was the Arizona Center for Investigative Reporting. Had a student in my lab who had already won money and had started a company to create a better photo display mechanism. And then he had the idea of starting the Arizona Center for Investigative Reporting. It's been going on for 2 years now. He's made enough money that he was able to go back and hire another student who had graduated a couple of years before, another one of our graduate students, and they're doing some really important work now. And again, grad student had the idea, executed it, we incubated it in the lab, helped him to get funding, and moved on. Stravel is a student travel site that a young lady heard me speak in one of the classes, came into my lab part-time to work on this company. She's now has funding from a VC company. She's under their portfolio, and she's going to get her MBA. She just started her MBA, and she's launched, I think it launched a couple of weeks ago, and she's in California now. So this is something that she had been thinking about. She had traveled all over the world, including Antarctica, and she wanted to come up with a way to match students to travel. If you don't have a friend who's willing to go hike in Iran, she'll match you with someone who's willing to do it. You can share your itinerary. She also has ambassadors all over the world that, at least one person or a couple people in a country that you will know who's a student like you, who'll show you around. So if you're in Turkey, she'll find you a person in Turkey. If you're in Brazil, she'll find you a person in Brazil who's also a student. So she was able to build this company in about 1 semester, then worked on it. She won funding to work on it the rest of that summer, and then she moved to California and got VC funding, and she's doing well with that. Another company that came out of my lab that won some money was a company called Pace, and I don't have a lot of slides on it because the guy who started this is former Special Forces, and he got the journalism bug and decided he wanted to create a company to protect journalists when they go in harm's way. He'll work for news organizations to train journalists, like if you're being shipped over to report on Syria or in Iraq, train journalists to stay safe, how to get out of zip ties, how to do all kinds of things. And then he also will do personnel recovery if it comes to that. I'm gonna leave it at that. I can't show his face. So he created that company, got funding. He's already, he has clients in doing training for media companies. Another company that was started before it came into my lab, but we took it to the next level, is DHN, which is the Deaf and Hearing Network. This young lady was a freshman when she got the idea, launched it. She's already won 3 Emmys and some Gracie Awards. And basically, it's a network aimed at people who are deaf and hard of hearing. Instead of having to look at bad closed captioning. She takes content from CNN, and then she has an insert of her own anchors who will sign that content, which of course ASL is the native language of people who are deaf, and she gives you your news in your own language. And this is blown up. She has a lot of support. Unfortunately, Comcast was talking to her about doing an on-demand channel, being on their on-demand channel, but I think she's just running out of time, and she felt like she needed to go get a traditional job. But I know her. She's going to work as a producer at the local NBC station, but she's coming back to finish this because it's her passion. And she's got people all over the Cronkite School like really interested in this thing. So just to wrap up, I wanted to talk about some of the things that I think are coming up next. Dan has talked a lot about virtual reality, and I think that's the next thing that we want to explore at the Cronkite School, and I think some of you should be looking at it. We already started a virtual reality documentary on the border, looking at immigration issues. Last week, my students were down on the border shooting ride-alongs. We were at the medical examiner's office in Pima County, where they have bones and other artifacts of people who died while trying to cross into the desert, across the desert into the United States. We're going over to a shelter in Nogales. We went down and did a story on the economic situation with Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales, Mexico. We'll be back with the people who put water out for the immigrants who try to cross over. We also will go out with some of the vigilantes who are trying to stop folks. And so we're going to cut that into a 360 video, but we'll also have some other virtual reality elements as part of this documentary. But we decided we're not going to stop there, because after we do this project, we're going to figure out, well, what tools or what can we come up with that can help journalists do this, also do virtual reality without having all the expense and time that we're using to try to pull together this one project. We've had to learn Unity. We've had to, the stitching software, the cost of all the contraptions. It's just been a lot. And if you're not the New York Times or Google or one of those, you may not have that money to be able to do virtual reality. So again, we start thinking about what tools can we create, what type of business can we spin off. And already just in the last couple of days, the students decided they're going to start their own VR business. And they've already written for grant proposals. And they just need from me when I get back tonight to approve it so they can go off and start their own company. This is the entrepreneurial thinking that we try to embed among our students at the Cronkite School. Of course, VR, ABC News is starting to do some projects in virtual reality. This is a great one, looking at an old mosque in Damascus. You should take a look at that. You have to download it you have to download the Jaunt app, and then you can look at some of the stuff that they're doing. I know Dan Pacheco's doing some great stuff. Noni LaPena, Gannett. Noni, who used to be at USC Annenberg, and now she's doing some great stuff. She's got a fantastic VR experience on Google Play, and it tells about the night that Trayvon Martin was shot. So you can do some really cool stuff. And again, our job, I think, as journalists in J School, we should be experimenting, and we should be able to figure out what our counterparts should be doing in the professional world. Not only will it help them, but it's going to help you get a job. And that's the most important thing. Of course, the Internet of Things. We should be looking at smart second screen technology and trying to figure out, what people are doing now with second screens, but also what newsrooms can do with second screens. And not many newsrooms have really tried to explore that. And how can you give people, when they're watching your newscast and they've got their phone in their hand, what should they be getting from you? What can you push to them that's more relevant to their individual selves? Again, wearables. What can we do beyond headlines? I mean, just giving people breaking news, that's cool, but that's going to get old fast. What else can we be doing? And this is where we should be experimenting in J schools. Connected cars. There's so many revenue opportunities, I think, once people have these cars that connect to the internet, where we can push, coupons, and we can push sales, or we can give them, news beyond. Be careful that there's an accident up ahead, but what are some of the things that we can do? And this is where we should be exploring all of this in J School. Of course, Google Glass was withdrawn, but Epson and all these other companies have smart glasses, and it's just a matter of time before we figure that out and we can give people real-time news that they can use. I'm a big believer in science fiction, and if it's on Star Trek, it's coming here. And of course, once you connect all these devices from your refrigerator to your stove, of course, your Nest and all of this stuff, I mean, the possibilities are endless. Your refrigerator will know if you're out of milk. And if your refrigerator knows you're out of milk, then as journalists, we should be able to do all kinds of stuff with that information. Not only sending you a coupon so you can go down to Safeway and get some more milk, but maybe this is a time that we can send you a little bit of information on why you need to drink more milk. Because it's relevant, it's in that moment. The bottom line is that, as Amy Webb said, that there has to be a symbiotic relationship between journalism schools and industry. They need us, we need them. We need to figure out new ways of storytelling and delivering of information, especially to these millions and millions and millions of Generation Y and Zs who are not going to get their news in traditional ways. And by traditional, I mean through a website. They're not even touching newspapers. And I think, again, J schools are the places where we can experiment in conjunction with sponsoring agencies or companies. If you run a PR company, an advertising company, or any type of newsroom, you should be coming to this J school and to others and saying, help us figure out some of this stuff, experiment. And at the same time, your students are going to be able to create their own jobs, or at least figure out what it is that they're passionate about. And failure should not be punished. Half of the stuff that we try at the Cronkite School is crap and it just didn't work. But I tell my students, don't be afraid. You're not going to get a failure, an F, because something that you created or tried to create didn't work. You're only going to fail if you didn't try, or if you just didn't do what you were supposed to do to try that experiment. So don't hold back. And when you take that fear away that you're going to be punished, oh my God, the creativity is amazing. It's kind of like what Knight is trying to do by giving money to people, prototype grants and other than that, to just experiment, see if it's going to work. And the last thing, of course, is that innovators are much more marketable because they can be both conventional and experimental. And that gives those employers a 2-for-1 hire. And I know my students who are working at different places, they're doing very, very well. The news ecosystem is changing, we know that, and we have to be just as quick and nimble. Not just chasing the latest fad because it's cool, and I do like cool stuff, but also trying on new things early in its development to see if it works for journalists. And that's what we should be doing. We should be leading and not just following what the industry is doing, because we all have heard this week or in the last couple of days that the industry is behind. So let's get out ahead and see if we can bring them along with us. Thank you.
I suspect that there are going to be a lot of questions for Retha, or a lot of comments and a lot of discussion. So, and that will just stay in